Let me just make sure that we're live on Facebook before we get started.
You get a lot of looks when you're standing here with like somebody pointing a camera with this fancy thing that Dex has filming me. Draws a lot of attention.
All right.
People think you're a famous person.
I know, I feel like a celebrity.
We are live on both Facebook and Zoom. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for people to join in. We'll start promptly at 5:30. For everyone that's already watching, I'm Isan from I Love the Burg. We're going to get started with Monica in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us for our virtual historic Burg tour today of St. Pete's wonderful waterfront. Thank you for your patience. Please feel free while we're live to use if you're on Facebook, the comments section, and then if you're watching on Zoom, go ahead and use that question and answer section. And we're going to do our best to work in as many of your awesome questions while we're live as possible.
Can you see the
Getting
timeline?
started momentarily. Got about one more minute.
From doing this tour at 5:30 p.m. we're going to see everybody we know going by on the waterfront running. Yeah.
Our host is just too famous.
And our cameraman.
It's true. For everyone who's just joining us, just a reminder that during our virtual historic tour, we would love to see your awesome questions in the comment section on Facebook. And then on Zoom, there's actually a question and answer section. Ask away, and we're going to do our best to work them in as we go. Getting started. It is 5:30. Monica, if you want to go ahead and get rolling.
Excellent. Thank you, Isa. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the historic Burg tour with I Love the Burg. I'm Monica Kile, your historian for today's tour. I'm joined by my husband, John Kile, who's at home working the computer. He's going to be managing the slides, adding some commentary here and there. We've also got Dex Fabian, who's the publisher of I Love the Burg, working the camera behind the scenes. And then Isa Taylor, who you heard from just a minute ago, who's kind of managing the tech side of things and will be helping out with question and answers. As she mentioned, if you have any question and answers, if you're on Zoom, you can use the comments section. And if you're on Facebook Live, there's a Q&A section, I believe. So we're really glad to be doing this 30-minute historic Burg tour with you, courtesy of a partnership with the city of St. Pete. This will be our first free tour, and we'll be doing one about once a month for the foreseeable future. So I'm going to get started. And the reason we chose to focus on St. Petersburg's wonderful waterfront is that in just 30 minutes, we're going to walk about half a mile from where I'm standing now at Demen's Landing at First Avenue South and Bayshore Drive. We're going to walk about half a mile up to the Vinoy. And in that 30 minutes, that half a mile, you can really learn an immense amount about St. Petersburg's history. And that's because so many of the formative aspects of our history really relate back to the waterfront in some way or another, from the founding of the city in 1888 to its popularity as a tourist destination today. So we're going to start with our current location here at Demen's Landing. Many of you have probably walked by the sign 100 times without stopping to read it. It marks the location of the city's first pier. Now, we think of the pier today as being at 2nd Avenue North. We just opened our grand new St. Pete Pier. But the first pier was built here in 1889 by a man named Pyotr Demenshev, who was from St. Petersburg, Russia, and he Americanized his name to Peter Demens. Peter Demens owned the Orange Belt Railroad, and he brought it here in 1888 to what was then just a tiny hamlet of about 10 buildings known as Wardsville. He renamed the city, founded the city of St. Petersburg, naming it after his hometown. And the year after he founded the city, he built the pier going out into the water here at this location. So it was a railroad pier. We think of our pier today as being a place of recreation and leisure. But the very first pier was really a working pier. Now, Dex, if you'll film across the street from me, you'll see this path where the planters are. That's our bike path known as the Pinellas Trail that goes way up the Pinellas Peninsula. That was the original location of the railroad tracks of the Orange Belt Railroad, which was later purchased by the Atlantic Coastline Railroad and then later even again by Seaboard Rail Lines. So imagine the railroad tracks coming straight down here and then crossing the street and over onto what we now call Demen's Landing. So the pier would have gone out to a depth where ships drafting 12 feet of water could pull up and dock against the pier, and they would load and unload their freight onto the railroad cars. So this was the beginning of the city of St. Petersburg. Almost immediately, a fish house was built on the pier, and this really became sort of the focus of our industry here in St. Petersburg. Within a few years, St. Petersburg was sending snapper and mackerel to cities up and down the East Coast. And by the 1890s, we were shipping out some 3 million pounds of fish a year, really all over the United States. So we had this sort of burgeoning cottage industries that grew up around the fishing industry that was centered here at the recreational pier. So we had things like ice plants, boat builders, net shops, things that cater to the fishing industry. Now, it was a working pier, but residents quickly realized it was also really a great place for leisure and recreation as well. Fishing was, not just an industry; it was also a recreation. So we had a lot of recreational fishermen that would line the pier and fish right next to the trains coming by. People also used it as a place to swim from. Now, we didn't have access to the barrier islands at the time like we do now. You could only get there by boat. We didn't have a bridge or a causeway out to Treasure Island or Paso Grill. So people would come down to the railroad pier to swim. So shortly after the pier is built, they built a really attractive bathhouse. They even put a big toboggan slide coming off the bathhouse. You could sort of slide off this big toboggan slide and cannonball into the water. So you had this sort of interesting mix of recreation and industry happening here at the railroad pier. A symbiosis that wouldn't last forever. That mix didn't quite work forever. But that recreation aspect really contributed to our other quickly growing industry in St. Pete, which was our tourism industry. So almost immediately after St. Petersburg's founding, we become a tourist destination, not just a winter tourist destination as we think of ourselves mostly today. I mean, come here right now, we've got gorgeous weather while they're suffering up north. But St. Pete was originally a very popular summer destination for Floridians who were sweltering in the interior of Florida before we had air conditioning. So they would come over on the train to sort of enjoy the sea breezes that we had here along the water, and they'd fish from the pier, slide off the toboggan slide. So we have sort of the blossoming of our two main industries, fishing and tourism, right here at the railroad pier that was built in 1889. So I mentioned recreation. I should have called out that the recreation was, of course, only for white people. And that's the other important site that was located here at what we now call Demen's Landing. And that was the site of the South Mole, which was the name of the black bathing beach. So the black swimming beach, the beach that was designated for black residents to swim at. That was sort of unofficially designated in 1916. And it was controversial from the beginning of its designation, really until it faded out of use in the 60s or 70s. And that's because, so this was a really pretty undesirable swimming area, particularly in later decades, as we get into the 40s and 50s. The city has put its waste treatment plants down at basically what we call Albert Whitted Airport today. So less than a mile south of here is the city's waste treatment plant. And in its earliest days, it wasn't much of a waste treatment plant. So we had essentially untreated sewage flowing into the bay and black youth swimming less than a mile away. So even though it was really kind of an undesirable place, whites still had a problem, and there was quite a bit of outcry about the idea that blacks would come through town to swim here at the beach. So really, blacks were only welcome downtown if they were working. St. Pete was very much a segregated southern city, and blacks were expected to be downtown if they were working, and really not at any other time. So it was always sort of controversial that this was a black swimming beach. Even though, as I said, it's really an undesirable place. It's not a desirable place for whites to be swimming. The bacteria levels were so high at one point in the 1950s that the city actually required black children who were taking swimming lessons here to be inoculated so that they didn't get sick from the bacteria. So that's how kind of undesirable this place was as a swimming beach. But blacks made the most of it. It was the only place to swim on our 45 miles of coastline that we have here in St. Petersburg. In 1952, there's a public pool that is open for black swimmers, but it's not until 1959 that our beaches are desegregated, starting with Spa Beach down at the foot of the pier here in St. Pete. So the South Mole really had an important place in our city's African-American history as well. So the rail line actually came down here until 1963, when the Atlantic coastline took out the depot and the railroad pier. They later, about 10 years later, sold this parcel of land to the city, who designated us as part of our waterfront park system, which I'm going to talk more about later. They named it after city founder Peter Demen, or Pyotr Demenchev, you'll remember his name is. So we really should call it, and I'll get Dex to focus in on this sign here where it says that it's pronounced Demens. The emphasis really should be on the second syllable, Demens, or Demens, as I say. But here in St. Pete, we call this Demon's Landing, as if it's a place of devil worship, perhaps. Really should be pronounced Demon's Landing, but we don't say that here. Kind of a funny little colloquialism we have here. I'm going to walk across the street to Pioneer Park, a place I think many people often overlook in their strolls along the waterfront. And as I do, John's going to show you some pictures of the things that we were just talking about.
Thank you, Mon. So the first picture I've thrown up here is Peter Demens himself, a fine-looking turn-of-the-century Russian. And he's actually also in this second photograph, which is of the Orange Belt Railroad locomotive. If you can see my cursor, he's the guy standing over here on the far right of the picture. The next shot is that railroad pier heading out there. So you can see the buildings all kind of on stilts on one side, your fish packing houses and other industries that came along there. We've got a boat docked up out here, and the railroad track runs along this side, and there's a walkway on the other side. Another angle of that same thing. You can see this is where people were to walk on the left side, but people are fishing right off this railroad bridge and even taking pictures for postcards right off that railroad bridge. So you can kind of see why industry and recreation were kind of colliding here. And there on the right side of this picture is that toboggan slide Monica mentioned, where you can zip right off into the water. This next picture is from probably the 1920s of the South Mole swim beach. Interesting thing about that, couple of newspaper articles. You know, we were so segregated in St. Petersburg, as Monica mentioned. The news of the South Mole was in the Negro news section of the newspaper. So there was a separate section for news. And this is an article here talking about the conditions and the dangerousness of the conditions in the water there. And I am going to give it back over to Monica because she looks like she is over in Pioneer Park.
I am in Pioneer Park. So I always feel like people miss this little almost postage stamp of a park here. This is a 2.1 acre park. We're kind of right at the foot of the Bayfront Tower condominium. We are just south of the Yacht Club and just across the street from Demon's Landing. This park was dedicated in 1981, and it was sort of the brainchild of descendants of city pioneers, and they partnered with the city, who donated the 2 acres of land. But descendants of city pioneers raised the money to build this 20-foot tall obelisk you'll see behind me. And Dex, if you'll walk around, you'll see that there's 4 brass plaques at the bottom of the obelisk, and it lists 600 pioneers of St. Petersburg. So 600 people that in some way or another had an influential role in the early development of St. Petersburg. And John's going to talk about a few of those a little bit later. The $175,000 to build the obelisk and to do all the original landscaping for the park was raised by private funds, and the city donated the land. Dex, when you're finished there, we're going to walk over here to the base of Bayfront Tower, and I'm going to show you something that'll we're going to circle back to at the end of the tour. This tall building behind me is the Bayfront Tower. This was the first waterfront high-rise, the first condominium that we had built on the waterfront in 1978. And as Dex sort of scans the building, I want you to pay attention to how it's really just one sort of monolith from the top to the bottom. It's really all kind of concrete and steel for 27 floors. There's virtually no activity on the bottom floors. There's a bar on the southeast corner that you can probably just make out there's two gentlemen sitting at. But other than that, there's no stores, there's no street life. We have the entrance to the parking garage, so you frequently have cars coming in and out. We learned a lot from this development in what not to do when we're designing condominiums along the waterfront. And as we'll see later in the tour, the zoning and design guidelines changed significantly in an effort to sort of engender a better street life in our city. And we're going to see that in a minute. Dex and I are going to walk over to the Yacht Club. So we're going to be walking up Bayshore Drive. And John's going to tell you about a few of the people who were mentioned on this obelisk here in Pioneer Park.
Yeah, I love that obelisk because you could probably scan all those names and do an entire history of early St. Petersburg. First picture I've got here is the top name on the second plaque, and that's Silas Dent, a name you might have heard. There used to be a Silas Dent steakhouse. He was known as the Hermit of Cabbage Key, and he was kind of a colorful character who lived on Tierra Verde, where you could only reach it by boat. And he was known for coming dressed as Santa Claus at Christmas and bringing gifts to children. His niece convinced him to move to St. Petersburg to an apartment when he got old. He fell in the shower his first night, broke 5 ribs, decided city life was too dangerous. The next one is our Mattinger's Hat Company, which was owned by Henry Mattinger, whose name is on there. Mattinger had a business on Central Avenue. The sign for it was revealed when they tore down a building about 5 years ago. A ghost mural appeared on the side of this building, which was then restored. So when you walk down Central around 6th Street, you'll see the restored Mattinger's hat store, as well as some of the other businesses that were there. There were not just men on this obelisk. It was put up in 1981 and it recognized a lot of folks, including Catherine Bell Tippett, who was a really big figure in the Audubon Society movement and the protection of migratory birds. She was a Mayflower family descendant. And she also chaired the city's war-saving stamp campaign during World War I. And perhaps the most towering figure in the Black community, in the early Black community, Elder Jordan's name is listed on there. He was a big part of the development of 22nd Street in the early 1900s. The Manhattan Casino was the Elder Dance Hall before it became known as the Manhattan Casino. He was such a successful businessman that it said he loaned money to the city of St. Petersburg during the Depression. I can't confirm that, but that is the rumor. And it looks like Monica has reached the Yacht Club.
I have. So I'm standing in front of the St. Petersburg Yacht Club, which was founded in 1909. This building was built in 1917. And just 4 years later, it was the first floor was almost completely underwater in the 1921 hurricane, which was the last really major hurricane to strike St. Petersburg, and did quite a bit of damage. Most of downtown was underwater. It actually killed 2 people along Central Avenue who were hit by metal awnings that flew off and killed them. We're going to show you some pictures of the Yacht Club in just a minute, but it has changed. You'll notice that it's changed quite significantly, but it has been in this location since 1917. As we start to walk down to our next stop in Straub Park, I want you to think a little bit about how it is, and actually we'll pause here for just a second. Dex, I want you to show how we're right up on the water. The marina is directly across the street from us. So the Yacht Club is almost immediately adjacent to the water. But really the Yacht Club and the Museum of Fine Arts, and we'll start walking, Dex. The Yacht Club and the Museum of Fine Arts are really the only 2 buildings in downtown that are right up against the water. Most of our restaurants, the condominiums, and our other buildings are set back from the water. And I wonder if anybody's ever thought about why that is, how we got all of this beautiful parkland on the water And then these two buildings kind of snuck their way in. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but I'm going to have John show those pictures of the Yacht Club first.
Yeah, so the first one here is the dedication of the Yacht Club building in 1917. You can see that it looks like they had a big party, lots of people on the balcony, and that would have been June, so it probably would have been a hot day. The next shot, not such a great day, the 1921 hurricane. This picture has been shared a lot and as a evidence of one man's disaster is another's opportunity. The developers of the Allendale community used this photo to promote the relatively high ground of the Allendale community over there. Monica, did you want me to throw up that map of the waterfront
Yeah.
as well? Yeah,
Well,
so
show them, yeah, show them the kind of how the museum and the Yacht Club sit right on the park, and then I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, you can see that the waterfront parks stretch really all the way up to Coffee Pot Bayou, past the Vinoy and down to Demon's Landing. And you can see where the NMFA sits, as well as the Yacht Club sitting right in park space. And Monica will talk a little bit more about that. And this next map shows that distance.
Okay, all right, John. Go ahead and make us big again, John, and I want Dex to show the park that we're walking past. This is Straub Park, and we're walking up to a monument that honors the man after whom this park is named, William Straub. And William Straub was the owner and editor of the St. Petersburg Times. He came to St. Pete in 1899, so just 10 years after the city's founding, and he bought the newspaper in 1901. And very quickly, Straub realized that that sort of tension I was talking about earlier with the fishing and the industry was creating, kind of wreaking havoc along our waterfront. So he recognized the potential for tourism as an industry and realized that the other things we had going along the waterfront, the net shops, the bait shops, we had a power plant at that time that's sort of belching smoke, was not a good look for a city that wants to become, market itself to tourists. So Dex, just shoot a quick shot of this memorial here to Straub Park. And this park that we're standing in now is named after him. So Straub soon started advocating that the city should purchase the waterfront and designate it as public parkland. Now, this was not an easy sell at the time. This is, we're just a young city, just 10 years old. And this is an expensive proposition for a city to buy its entire public waterfront, or to buy its entire waterfront. Sorry, Texas. There you go. You got me. I see the camera's working its way around here. So Straub starts advocating in his newspaper. When that doesn't work, just the regular editorial doesn't work, he's not above a strategic ploy. So he gets some of his wealthy friends to purchase the land along the waterfront, and he starts running editorials in the newspaper that say the Yankees are buying up the waterfront. Now, this is true. Most of his friends are from up north, as is everybody in St. Pete at that time. And as I said, we're a very southern city. We're not that far off the Civil War. So the idea that Yankees are buying up the waterfront really raised a lot of hackles and really got people going and advocating that the city should purchase the waterfront, which is in fact what they did. And in 1910, we have the first city park designated right here along the waterfront where we're standing now. At that time, it was called Waterfront Park and was later renamed Straub Park. Over the next several years, we add more and more lots along the water to the public coffers, the public ownership, so that by 1916, we have one of the largest public waterfronts in the country. We still claim that we have the third largest public waterfront behind Vancouver and Chicago, the third largest in North America. Really an unusual thing. Think about how Tampa, has a very similar waterfront, but it's not publicly owned. So if you'll notice, all of our condominiums, our high rises, our restaurants, our businesses, our shops are set back off of the water. They're behind the park, except for the Yacht Club and the MFA, as we discussed earlier. John, we're going to walk across the street. Throw up those pictures of Straub, and then when I get to the other side of the street, we'll talk a little bit about why the Yacht Club and the MFA have land in the park.
Yeah, so first I'm going to show a couple of pictures of that industrial waterfront again. You can see the smoke belching from the tower up here, and just a kind of really not put together waterfront. Another shot, just a mishmash of buildings and boats. This is Straub's painting himself. Straub was a very talented artist, and he said, "This is what our waterfront could look like with tourist vessels coming in." And this picture is draped in oranges. There's Straub, his wife, and their daughter Blanche. The dredge that was used to dredge and fill those parks was named the Blanche, and a lot of that seawall area that we think of now along North Shore Park all the way up to Coffee Pot Bayou is all a product of Straub's work.
Yeah, actually, John, everything east of Beach Drive is dredge. So where Dex and I are standing now is dredge and fill. This is all land. This was all sort of sandy, submerged lands until the early 1900s when they dredged and filled it in order to make this parkland. We're going to take a quick pause. We're along Bayshore Drive at 2nd Avenue North. We're right at the foot of the pier. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the pier today because we're going to do that as a separate tour. But I will tell you, it was built in the first recreational pier, the first municipal city-owned pier was built here in 1913. And we've basically had a pier here ever since. We've had several different iterations. And as most of you know, this latest one just opened to great fanfare and success. I do want to point out, though, what has to be the prettiest bathroom, maybe in all of the United States. We call this here in St. Pete our comfort station. You can see it at the top of the building. But more locally, more affectionately, we call this Little St. Mary's. And the reason for that is that you can see it has this beautiful Romanesque design. It was designed by an architect named Henry Taylor. And the story goes, and it looks strikingly like St. Mary's Church, which is over at 5th Street, kind of over near USF St. Pete when you're getting off of 175. And the story goes that Henry Taylor was stiffed in his payment for designing St. Mary's Church, and he built this bathroom to look just like it, kind of out of spite. Great story. Unfortunately not true. The bathroom was actually built a year before the church was, and it's much more likely that Henry Taylor was just a fan of the Romanesque design style, and also that this octagonal shape was a good fit for a very small parcel of land. It allowed you to get a lot of use out of the building on a very small piece of land, which is what he had to build the world's prettiest bathroom. So we're going to walk down right in front of the MFA, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see the kapok tree that is got to be one of the most photographed things in February and March in St. Petersburg. But John's going to throw a picture up of it later because the sun's not in our favor for showing the kapok tree. But here is the Museum of Fine Arts. I'm going to pause just up here for just a second to talk about it. This is a second institution that I mentioned that got land, again, directly on the water. If Dex turns the camera in a moment, you'll see how it's right up against the water. They actually, both the Yacht Club and the MFA, have rights to their public park, to the park, what once was public parkland. And why is that? Well, the Yacht Club opened, as I mentioned, in 1917. So founded in 1909, which is basically just a year before the park system is implemented. And many of the men who instituted the park system were the same men that instituted the Yacht Club. So William Straub actually was on the first board of directors for the Yacht Club. The intention was always that there would be a yacht club sort of as part of the waterfront park system. So the city almost immediately leased land to the Yacht Club. There were some legal challenges to whether or not the city was allowed to lease land to a private club, and to show you kind of how much power and influence was sort of nestled in the Yacht Club. It actually went all the way to the Florida State Legislature, who passed an act saying, yes, indeed, the city was allowed to lease its land to a private club. A similar story happened here with the Museum of Fine Arts with a wealthy woman, a wealthy heiress named Margaret Atchison Stewart, who wintered in St. Pete. Her father had invented a type of graphite that became very in demand, and he became a very wealthy person. She became a very wealthy heiress. He was an associate of Thomas Edison. She wintered in St. Petersburg. She felt like she couldn't live without art and an art museum. So she said to the city, I will endow an art museum to the tune of $1 million plus. I'll help build it. I'll give you some initial funding for the building itself. I'd like it to be on the waterfront. And in that case, the city actually sold or gave the land, gave ownership of the land to the MFA, to the Museum of Fine Arts. So the MFA actually owns the land on which they sit, and then up to the first sidewalk, which we'll pass in a minute. The stipulations on both the Yacht Club and the MFA is that if they ever cease to be used for their original purpose, a yacht club or a museum for art, that land reverts to the city. So we jealously guard our waterfront here in St. Pete, but these are two occasions where, you know, wealth and power and influence will get you somewhere, and it'll get you waterfront property in St. Pete. But they've been really excellent stewards of the property. We are going to walk up to the Vinoy in a second. John, I'm going to have you throw up those couple of pictures of Margaret Atchison Stewart. I'll mention that the museum opened in 1965 with some pieces of work from Miss Stewart's own collection. And over the years, I think it has something like 20,000 pieces in its collection. It's got some Monets. And now under their new director, a really growing, fine collection of contemporary art. They added another wing in, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 2003. And
somewhere
for the first
mid 2000s.
Yeah, somewhere in that. Yeah. For the first 30 years, the Museum of Fine Arts was actually free to the public. Only in 1993 did they institute an admission fee. So really, again, being good stewards of for this public trust of land that they've been given. So John, why don't you throw up those pictures as we walk down to the Benoit? We gotta
this first one
here. We'll run out of time.
is the is St. Mary's. And I like the idea that maybe we start a rumor that the comfort station was a scale model of St. Mary's. So I think we should go.
Hey, there you go.
This second one of my favorite shots here. This is Straub Park. This building here that I'm highlighting with my gigantic cursor here is actually the Yacht Club. That's where the Kapok tree sits now. The MFA was built just beyond that. All these trees are so much smaller than what we think of when we think of this park now. No sign of those great big banyan trees. Maybe Dex can pan over to the banyan trees while you're walking to show, you know, how imposing those banyan trees, which are about 100 years old, are now. You can see there's the Kapok tree in all its glory, and then here's a nice shot of Margaret Atchison Stewart, who really was instrumental in bringing the MFA there with gifts during her lifetime and also in her estate.
You know what, Dex, let's cut through here. John, we're gonna cut through the middle of the park and touch on the condo progression and then end down in Benoit. So I know we're right at 6 o'clock, so we got about another 5 to 7 minutes and we'll be wrapping up. I talked about earlier how the Bayfront Tower condominium, which was built in 1978, really took up its entire footprint, just this sort of massive building all in one place. And we really learned a lot from that experience in how not to activate your street life. And there has been a progression in zoning and design guidelines since then. Dex and I are walking over to the opposite side of the park. We're right up against Beach Drive. And we're going to show you some of those changes. Dex, let's walk right over here to where these flowers are, and we'll get a shot of the 400 Beach condominium, which is a good example of really our latest progression of design. Now, Dex, notice that the big tall portion of the building, the mass, what they call the mass of the building, is set well back from the road. And the first, the part of the building that sits right on the sidewalk is just a 2 or 3 story building. This feels much better to a pedestrian walking by. It's far less imposing. It feels more welcoming. It feels sort of charming. Notice also that there's a shop here. And as we walk down, you'll be able to see there's restaurants, there's 400 Beach, there's a little kind of fast go restaurant in there as well. We require those things now. So we require that the mass of the building be set back, and we require that they include restaurants, shops, things that are going to encourage street life. And as we walk down, you'll be able to see just how busy, and anybody that tries to come downtown on a really any night in the spring knows just how busy Beach Drive is and how impossible it is to find a parking spot. And when I moved here about 20 years ago, there was nothing on Beach Drive. So these changes in our design guidelines and our zoning have made a huge difference in encouraging our street life. We're going to walk down and finish at the Vinoy because it's really the jewel of St. Pete's waterfront and has been really since it was built in 1925, save for some years in our downturn in the 70s and 80s. So the Vinoy, which you'll be able to see in just a minute, was built in 1925 by a man named Amer Vinoy Lochner. So if you've ever wondered where that name came from, now you have it. He lived just across Beach Drive from the location of Benoit. It was just a big empty waterfront lot at the time. He was hosting a party. Attending the party was the golf great Walter Hagen, and they engaged in a wager to see if Walter Hagen could hit a golf ball off of Amer Vinoy Lochner's pocket watch. And Dex is showing you John, I can see now John's showing you pictures.
Yeah, I was showing a picture of the Vinoy while you walked there, but I can stop.
So Dex is showing the diners at 400 Beach. So the bet was, could Walter Hagen hit a golf ball off of Amer Vinoy Lochner's pocket watch without cracking the crystal? Well, he did. The golf balls landed in the big waterfront empty lot across the street from Lochner's property, and all the party guests clapped and cheered and said, you know what? That's a pretty piece of property. You could build a hotel there and make millions, which is in fact exactly what he did. Spent about 10 months and $3 million to build the Vinoy Hotel. It was originally called the Vinoy Park Hotel. It opened on New Year's Eve, 1925, and at the time charged $20 a night, which was one of the most expensive hotels in the state at that time. In its heyday, it hosted anybody who was anybody: the DuPonts, the Guggenheims, the Pillsburys, J. Edgar Hoover, F. Scott Fitzgerald, many, many presidents. And it was really the place to see and be seen. During World War II, like many hotels in St. Petersburg and Florida at large, it was rented out to the military. The Army Air Corps used it, and that's how they were able to kind of keep the doors open. After World War II, the hotel reopened and operated really in a state of kind of decline. No air conditioning and sort of a lack of regular maintenance ended up taking quite a toll on it until in the 1970s, it was really effectively a low rent boarding house. It was renting rooms for as little as $7 a night. Eventually it was boarded up altogether. Vagrants slept in it for many years in the 70s and 80s, and it was slated for demolition, and it was saved by a voter referendum in 1992. The city came up with kind of a clever deal with a developer that in exchange for renovating the hotel, the developer could build condos down that way, Dex, if you're able to shoot those. So that's where they made their money. The hotel reopened to sort of great fanfare in 1993, the same year that the sort of sister hotel to the Vinoy, the Sereno, which was just down on Beach Drive, was demolished. So we lost the Grand Sereno, but we were able to save the Vinoy. It's a Mediterranean revival style building, and you can see with its tile roof, it's got this tower that's a very typical Med Rev design, the arches on the veranda. And John, why don't you go ahead and show them those pictures and explain what they are, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I showed a couple of the early shots of when it was being built. The next picture you're looking at here is the hotel room when it was open. Two cute little twin beds there. When it was renovated, every two rooms was turned into one room in order to meet modern tourist expectations for a hotel room. Here's a shot of some folks on the veranda. This is while it was boarded up. You can see the window at Marchand's has holes in it, and an aerial shot of just total disrepair. There was a chain link fence around it. And there's the Sereno. The Sereno was also a very beautiful building. Didn't go down without a fight. Went down for the filming of Lethal Weapon 3. This cop car here is actually a movie prop, and didn't even get the pride of being in the movie. It showed up after the credits. And to add insult to injury, they misspelled St. Petersburg's name in the movie. So it was not demolished for the movie. It was going to be demolished anyway, and they decided to use it.
Yeah, thank you, John. But we're lucky that we saved the Vinoy. And I want to close with kind of talking about that, about how much care and thought we really need to put into this wonderful waterfront that we have here. You can see in just the half a mile that we've strolled from Demon's Landing to the Vinoy, you know, we've covered this sort of progression of the city's history from the founding with the railroad pier in 1888 and 1889, down through the Vinoy being built in 1925, and its renovation and reopening in 2000 or 93 that sort of sparked this downtown renaissance that we're still in today. We have to remember the sort of visionary, the incredible vision that men like William Straub had to protect our waterfront, and realize that it's not a foregone conclusion that we are this desirable city. 10 years ago, in 2011, the city underwent the charter review, the city charter review. The charter is essentially our city constitution, if you will. And it was suggested and then required that the city implement a downtown waterfront master plan. And John, I have a slide of that. I won't mention the 5 major themes of that waterfront master plan, but our viewers can look at it themselves. And it's really just sort of a commitment from the city to say, here are the things that are important to us about this waterfront, and we're going to protect them. As we now face, I mean, you know, you haven't noticed, St. Pete has been discovered, or rediscovered, I should say, because we've had lots of these periods of boom and times where people love St. Petersburg and sort of discover it. And we worry sometimes that it's going to be loved to death. So now we have to ask ourselves, what's the next stage of how our waterfront is going to develop? And do we need to think more about things like our high rises? We've done a good job in how we're designing them. So I put that out there. I put that out there for you to consider. And I know everybody in St. Pete loves St. Pete. We love the Burg. I love the Burg. And I am Monica with I Love the Burg. I hope you've enjoyed our historic Burg tour. Thank you again to our partner, the City of St. Pete. And thanks to John and Isa and Dex. And we will see you next time. About a month from now, we'll be doing another one. Take care.